The barrel spit heat into a summer sky that smelled of diesel and hay. And somewhere down the line, a man with a face like old leather whispered a prayer to a gun he did not fully trust, but could not live without. That single sentence opens onto the through line of this story. How three German heavy field guns, the Flak 88mm, the Pak 43, and the Flak 105mm, refused to be confined by their designer's intentions and instead rewrote the map of fear and fire on the battlefields of Europe. At first glance, they are cold, precise machines, rifled steel, equilibrated equilibrators, a geometry of recoil and propellant. But for the soldiers who walked beside them, they became weather. The Flak 88 emerged not as a tank killer, but as an anti-aircraft instrument, raised on a cruciform mount to chew through the sky. Its elevation and velocity were supposed to intercept a scattering of enemy bombers. Instead, on flat summer fields or pitted Russian steppe, it looked up and then looked sideways and found tanks. The round its crew hauled and loaded had more velocity than many tank guns. It pierced armor with a cruelty that the designers had not prioritized. That mismatch between intended role and lethal consequence is the secret heartbeat beating through all that follows. You feel the change in the ground as much as in the tactics. Early German tank units rolled forward with infantry and support guns. Then they encountered new beasts, Soviet heavy tanks, British armored formations, and the Flak 88's tall silhouette began to appear at the edge of orchards, behind hedgerows, and on sunlit ridgelines. Its crew slid behind a shield for protection and trained the long barrel like a bayonet. The elevation gear and the gunner's eye combined to make a shot both precise and brutal. Men in opposing armor learned that the Flak 88 could reach farther, strike harder, and kill from angles their own guns could not equal. For crews operating those weapons, the Flak 88 was a paradox, an anti-air instrument that led men to worry most about a thing on the ground bearing down on them. Into this growing theater of dual-purpose killing came the Pak 43, a gun born from necessity and obsession. Engineers in factories turned to long barrels and new breech designs to put more propellant behind heavier shells. The Pak 43's monoblock barrel and ingenious sliding wedge breech offered a velocity that, paired with heavy armor-penetrating shells, made it the answer to the Allied heavy tanks creeping into German fields. It was not pretty. It was heavy, awkward to move, and its muzzle brake spat a flash like a small sun. But when it spoke, armor screamed. Crews operating the Pak 43 learned to embrace the awkwardness because the gun solved a simple and terrible problem. It destroyed tanks before they could close to range. Where the Flak 88 had improvised an anti-tank life, the Pak 43 arrived as purpose-built retribution. There is a scene that repeats in memory. A gun crew slinging a shell into place by lamplight, hands slick with powder and sweat. The gunner checks range with a glance at a battered optic. The loader gives the nod. The silence is a living thing until ignition. The recoil rocks the very world. The gun carriage digs into the earth. The tracer line marks a cold, mathematical parabola. For the men who lived through this cycle, each shot carried the weight of survival. They spoke of the noise not as information, but as an animal. This one was big and old, that one young and brittle. The men learned to read the weapon as if it were a person, temperamental, exacting, and fatal. Meanwhile, the Flak 105mm, a later and larger anti-aircraft project, tried to scale the concept of the 88 into something greater. It carried promise of higher altitude reach and heavier bursting shells, and in theory would press the sky further from the ground troopers below. In practice, It revealed the limits of German wartime industry and logistics. The 105 required complex carriages, more steel, and more time to produce and maintain. In combat, it could send down shrapnel and blast that made a mess of approaching formations, yet its bulk made it less mobile and more vulnerable in the fluid make-or-break moments that increasingly defined late war engagements. That tension between power and deployability becomes a human story as much as a technical one. Crews who could transport a Pak-43 across a field in the dark found the heavier Flak 105 a hazard to move, and they felt the difference in their limbs, in the time it took to re-emplace, in their sense of whether they would be there at dawn. Hidden in the mechanics and the memoirs are small truths that surprise the attentive listener. One of them, the Flak 88's greatest advantage was not merely its shell, but its sighting system and elevation range, which gave crews a near-tactical sniper's capacity at great distance. Another, the Pak-43's muzzle brake design was as much a compromise with recoil as it was an invitation to get targeted, since the visible blast signature broadcast a successful firing position to enemy artillery and fighters. And a third, logistic choices, metal allocation, trained crew availability, rail transport priorities, often determined which of these guns saw action more than any battlefield doctrine ever could. A fourth gem. Crews sometimes preferred captured ammunition when they could get it, because the chemistry or case design occasionally offered a cleaner, more consistent burn, an odd, almost petty detail that nevertheless changed a crew's confidence and thus their performance. Halfway through this arc comes the necessary small shock. The Flak 88 was never meant to be the iconic anti-tank gun that footage later makes it. And yet, that exact misfit shaped many battles more than any single tank could. That is the aha moment. These weapons were not simply tools, but adaptive organisms in the industrial ecosystem. The Flak 88 adapted to the battlefield because it could. The Pak-43 was invented because nothing else adapted fast enough. The Flak 105 tried to leap too far and was held back by factories and fuel shortages. Technology bent to the realities of men and supply, and that bending decided lives. Tension builds when we move from theory to confrontation. Imagine an orchard shattered into hedgerows. A column of armor slouched forward in a valley of dust. The Flak 88 hides at the tree line, black with soot. The Pak-43 sits dug into a farm hollow, its muzzle a promise. Overhead, a handful of Allied fighters scream past like angry birds, and below them, the ground war spills into a compact, brutal theater. The first Pak-43 round finds a target at long range. The turret of a Sherman collapses inward in a sound no one forgets. The hedgerow erupts with smoke, and then a squad of infantry spills from cover to try to take the guns. The Flak 105 opens on the tank approaches with fragmentation, seeking to deny armor the field. For a moment, brief, furious, the three concepts converge. Anti-aircraft mechanics used as anti-tank weapons, specialized anti-tank design doing the direct killing, and heavy anti-aircraft providing suppression. The crew faces fear that is both immediate and existential. The ground they defend is everything and nothing. The artillery becomes the hinge on which the scene turns or collapses. And yet here is the larger, harsher truth at the climax. No single gun, however expertly made or desperately used, could substitute for a collapsing logistical system or an air force that no longer dominated the sky. During those critical summers and winters, Allied air superiority and numbers slowly turned these weapons from instruments of tactical surprise into static graves. A Pak-43 might still cut through armor, but it could not by itself hold a flank if gasoline and rails and replacements failed to arrive. The guns could win engagements, but not the strategic war against an opponent who could replace lost tanks and then some. In the face of carpeted bombers and endless convoys of men and materiel, the Flak 88's genius and the Pak-43's brutality ultimately matured into a melancholy. They were brilliant answers to tactical problems that strategic context had already made obsolete. When the guns fell silent, it was not mere technology left behind, but a human tally. Veterans remembered the recoil in their shoulders, the taste of primer in their mouths after long days, the way a successful hit could feel like relief and doom at once. Factories that had mastered the monoblock barrel and complex muzzle brakes kept working until overhead the drums of bombs told them they could not keep going. Decades later, farmers in some fields still turn up casings and fragments, small relics of decisions made in steel and sweat. The lesson that lingers is not simply that these were great guns, but that their greatness was shaped and limited by people and supply, by the way men loaded shells in the moonlight, and by whether a rail line still existed to bring propellant. The final takeaway slides into view like the last spent shell casing slipping from a loader's hand. These weapons mattered because they rewrote tactical possibilities and forced commanders on both sides to change how they fought. Yet their ultimate fate was tied to decisions far from the firing line. Allocation of metal, the rhythm of industry, the control of the sky. The Flak 88 taught soldiers that roles can be improvised. The Pak-43 taught them that specific answers can be devastating. The Flak 105 taught them the limits of scaling without the means to move. Together, they tell one story about war itself. Accuracy and power can solve immediate problems, but only systems deliver victory. In the end, the barrels fell silent because the rest of the apparatus could not keep up, and the men who had trusted those guns walked away with echoes of recoil still vibrating in their bones. If you enjoyed this, tap like and subscribe. It really helps. And drop a quick comment telling us where you're watching from. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world. Your reply helps the video reach more people just like you.